Hi, Misha here, and this is one I've actually been thinking about doing for probably a year. But in honor of the Bad Batch Season 2, or Series 2, coming out, let's look at shuttlecraft and transports used by the Republic and the Empire. And yeah, we'll delve a little into the First Order only because it's so directly connected to what came before. So we'll look at some short range, some long range. Yeah, I don't know. I've got pretty much all of them here except for two examples that just aren't available. We have members from the original Titanium series, from the newer Black series Titanium, which is now discontinued too, and from the Hot Wheels series, which I believe as of 2021 or 2022 was also discontinued. Yeah, Diecast. I wish it was more popular. But we do have quite a few. So we'll just dive on in, going back to the beginning of the Clone Wars 22 BBY. And we end back where we started. What do you think? Another kind of secondary craft or background craft, but I think in general, because of the shuttle Tydirium, because of the Lambda class, they've gotten more prominence than they would have in any of their series. And I don't know, they're just interesting, unique. I've always liked them. Like I said earlier, part of the reason was I had the toy from Kenner as a kid, so that kind of left me predisposed. But in general, they're just neat, and they look good in this size. They're not too big, not too little. So, which one's your favorite? Do you like the Lot gunship, or maybe you like the newer designs like the Delta or the classic Lambda, or maybe you even like the Upsilon from the First Order? It has a very industrial look, I'll give it that. Let me know in the comments. Let's chat some spaceships. As always, if you could, like, share, subscribe. This is Misha, and I better get back to work. I have to begin with the Lot gunship, the Lardy as it was nicknamed. It was really our first military transport or shuttle we saw within Star Wars, as it was at the beginning of the Clone Wars, the Battle of Geonosis, at the end of Attack of the Clones, also known as the good part of the movie. And I have three examples here, and they're all a little different. On the far left, we have the original Titanium. On the far right, we have the newer Black Series Titanium. And in the middle, we have the Hot Wheels variant. And I have others, but they're mostly just different paint things. For a while, a couple of years ago, I ended up just getting a lot of these, not even necessarily buying them. Some of them came to me. Anyway, there are a lot of configurations of this gunship, of this transport. So we'll talk about that and get into it. It was designed and built by Rothana Heavy Engineering as a short-range, at least primarily the Primero variant, transport to basically get troops and hardware from orbit in carriers down to a planet's surface. And it could go from orbit to planet, and it could be sealed up for vacuum, but since it was more of a repulsor lift craft with about 8 hours of onboard fuel, it really wasn't meant to go back from the surface to the orbiting ship, so it had to be retrieved somehow or single use. Early on, it was actually nicknamed the Jedi helicopter in Attack of the Clones, and it does explain why it has a very striking resemblance, both in principle, configuration, and even somewhat looks to the Hind, the MiL Mi-24 helicopter. And maybe that's why I like it, I don't know. But it's a heavily armed beast. And we have three basic versions. The LAATI, which is Low Altitude Assault Transport Infantry. And then the LAATC, same but carrier. And we have the LAATLE, which is slightly different than the other two. But they all make up a family, and these saw service throughout the Clone Wars, and even afterwards, at least for a brief time. Taking out the spinny thing, we're going to actually look at the Hot Wheels first. because in some ways it's maybe the best. This one does have the doors buttoned up. They did open. There's a couple of different styles. There's the Attack of the Clones style and the Clone Wars animated style. But this one here is fully kitted out, and this is an LAATI, the Lottie, or Lottie, because it has all of its guns. But before you get to that, the specs. It's a little over 17.5 meters long and nearly that wide. Its top atmospheric speed is about 620 kph, so it's not getting anywhere fast. And again, it's more of a repulsor lift craft, so no big engines, and it does not have a hyperdrive. It does have shielding, though, and armor. Has a crew of 2 minimal. Again, very Hind-inspired cockpit. You have a pilot and a gunner, and actually the gunner sits more forward. But then you have optional crew, 2 to 4 additional gunners. Now, the most optional things are these ball turrets. They're composite laser turrets in the front, kind of chin mounted. They rotate, swivel, but they can be removed. They actually house a gunner if put on. And there are 2 additional ones on the wingtips, but these are remote controlled, computer controlled. They're controlled from the inside by someone else. And in the front, we also have 2 additional laser cannon, and 1 more in the back. These front and back ones are more for anti-personnel, anti-robot defense, whereas the composite beams, because of their rotation, are more for defense against fighters or other craft. And if that's not enough, we also have 2 missile launchers. These are effectively belt-fed with 30 missiles each. And, just in case that's not enough, under each wing you have 4, and they are on this model, light rockets. I think they're mostly air-to-air rockets. So yeah, pretty well armed up. So that explains the gunship role. But inside, the I version, the infantry version, carries 30 clone troopers, plus 4 speeder bikes. The variation would change over the time, and even has provisions for 1 medical droid or other small support. It's a little cramped in there, and to be fair, it's just basically standing room only, no seats. But it gets the job done because they're basically just dropping from orbit to a planet. So basically these would land, drop off their troops, and then fly around supporting them with their heavy weaponry. Pretty neat, I think. Now let's move on to the original titanium. They did lots of paint schemes, but basically the same mold over and over and over. It still has the composite beams on the wings, but notice there are no side blisters, side bubbles. Instead we have open doorways, which, yeah, sure. And we have the front guns, and we still have the launchers, and we still have the rear gun emplacement. This is more in the open, kind of this reminds me very much of a Vietnam Huey helicopter look with the open doors. And it is the Clone Wars variant because the doors just fold open to the back. It would have been really cool if the doors hinged, but I guess they didn't do that. Oh well. But it goes to show you the open interior where the troops could stand. Now a variant, the carrier, was only crewed by 2, a pilot and a gunner, typically, and often had some of the weaponry stripped off for weight purposes, because it was to transport heavier craft from orbit to the surface. Things like the ATTE, or even heavier walker types, or a bunch of speeders, whatever. It was less of a personnel transport and more of a walker carrier. And typically it could only carry 1 large walker, or a couple of smaller ones, or over a dozen speeder bikes. And so I think this one kind of stands in pretty good as a carrier because it doesn't have as many guns, and it has the open doors, which, a lot of them, if they had to hang out the sides, would have to do that. But this is the original one we got for years, and it's pretty good. Again, I wish the doors folded, and I wish I had the side blisters, but it is a little bit bigger than the Hot Wheels, by a little bit. And both of them are very metal except for the guns, which is good because it's nice that these guns won't just snap off. We have one more. This is the lot ship from the Black Series Titanium, and it's actually the smallest, but in some ways maybe the best of the mix here. It has the front guns. They're a little slimmer, more accurate. They do have a bit of pivot to them, which is kind of neat. The rear gun too has a bit of pivot, a little smaller. Still have the rockets under the wings. Interestingly, the composite beams are a little further out, a little smaller. But again, there's been various depictions, both in movies and in Clone Wars of this, so there's not one right gunship. And notice it has the closed doors. Again, they don't open, sadly. But what's nice about this one, there's no screw holes really visible anywhere. It's a very tight, buttoned-up design. And very metal, except for the guns. I like to think of this one, since it is a little smaller, as the LAAT/LE variant, which was a smaller variant, about 12 meters long, designed more for space operation. It was more of a police craft, a patrol craft, an inspection craft. Some even had a hyperdrive engine in the compartment, so they could go into space. They had artificial gravity, which the other ones did not. And they typically had a smaller crew with less weapons because they're not combat-oriented. They were more, again, peacekeeping-oriented. And so this one not having the side blisters, side ball turrets, makes sense. Again, it's not exact, but it kind of fits in my own headcanon. But I do like this newer Black Series. I like that we do have extra molds, and so we can get kind of, this one's good at that one's good at this. They're all pretty good in their own way, and the Hot Wheels is one of their betters too. And just recently, as I mentioned in the Star Destroyer video, we've got a larger scale on the Select Series. But this was really the original short-range space-to-surface transport used extensively by the clones. It could also carry quite a bit of cargo, and it was just a very configurable design. But it was slow, even if it was well armed, and its range was very negligible. What if you needed to go farther out into space? So the Clone Wars kick off with the Battle of Geonosis, and by the time of the Battle of Christophsis, they realize that they need a supplementary craft to the lot. They're not to replace it, but something for longer range, different type of missions. Thus, Cygnus Spaceworks introduces the new class shuttle, sometimes called the Republic Assault Shuttle, Attack Shuttle. Interesting design, and this is really our very first shuttle that we see. Mostly featured in the Clone Wars, as far as I can recall. It's a little longer than the gunship at about 19 meters, but it's a little thinner and sleeker. Has a crew of 2, pilot, co-pilot / gunner. It can carry 30 troops, but only about 2 tons in cargo. There's pros and cons. Weaponry, it has 2 medium lasers, 2 heavy lasers. Some variants have 4 light lasers. That's not heavy, I misspoke. 2 medium and 2 light. Some variants have 4 light lasers, so it's a little bit configurable. And it does have a Class 1 hyperdrive with a Class 12 backup. And it's faster in an atmosphere compared to the gunship 2 at about 850 kph. So, at least it's supersonic. It does have shielding, armor, yada yada yada. Pretty long-ranged. And because it's expected to go on longer missions, it does actually have amenities like, seating for the people on board. Very much designed when a mission is away from a base or ship. And it has the now kind of iconic folding down wings, and they're kind of positionable. I think it looks really neat with the wings down. The cockpit's interesting. The nose is actually the boarding ramp, and the cockpit is on a secondary deck above, kind of a flight deck. And what happens is the clones that pilot it get in and their seats kind of raise up into the cockpit area. The cockpit area also can serve as ejection or evacuation capsule if needed too. And your troopers or cargo are in the back, pretty standard on all that. And we see quite a few of these in use. There's even a more of a cargo variant called the Rho class that has a larger fin on the top here, and it can carry cargo pods underneath. So there are a few derivatives. And these would remain in the Empire for quite some time, and the Rebels would even get some. So they were quite successful. The benefits over the gunship, well, you have a hyperdrive. It's faster, longer range, more comfortable. But the downside, far less offensive weaponry, and it carries less. They both carry 30 troopers, but the trick is the gunship also carries 4 speeder bikes and med droid, or it can be easily reconfigured, adapted to carry larger things. These really could not. A little too sleek and thin for that. So that's why they were both complementary to each other. This one's from the original Titanium series, and they're pretty uncommon today, which is a shame because it's a neat design. It's a little bit light. The metal is the center body with the wings being the plastic, and it's a little small, but that's kind of common for the later ones. I don't care. I'm glad someone made it because it is heavily seen in the Clone Wars, and at least in secondary canon is used up through the Civil War with the Rebels. What do you think? It is kind of the earliest shuttle, and it starts the kind of Greek letter naming system. And at least this little model does have the folding wings. The only downside is they do fold down a little too far. At least one of them does on mine. Just notice the stops a little off, but that's okay. I mean, these are inexpensive toy/models, so gotta cut them some slack. Comes with the usual stand. So that's that, long range and all that. But what if you need range and firepower? From my little port. I always have trouble finding the port on this one. It does stay plugged in very nicely though. Well, as the Clone Wars went on, a solution to that was found as well. The Omicron class attack shuttle or assault shuttle, made famous by Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch. Their ship, the Marauder, is kind of the central one in the show. Unfortunately, we don't know much about this as it's new to canon, but I'm sure as time goes on we'll learn more. But it seems to have been introduced in the middle, towards the end of the Clone Wars. It was really from Cygnus Space Systems, again, kind of a adaptation and development on the new class, but maybe a little more firepower, durability, a little bit tougher in combat, if also giving up a little bit as a shuttle. As far as the model, this is from Hot Wheels. It may be one of the last ones we actually see from them in this scale, because it came out in 2021. But it does have the folding wings, and they actually click into place, which is one thing I really do like about the Hot Wheels. They actually use detents and stuff, and the stand is very tight on this one. You can tell I haven't taken it off much, but better tight than loose. So here we are, with the wings deployed. It is very wide and pretty weighty. The center wing is actually metal, as is most of the body except for the nose tip. And the side wings are, of course, pretty flexible, which is good, plastic. And it is a good size in the hand when spread out. It does have a hyperdrive, does have very good armor and shielding. It has 2 forward-facing heavy laser cannons, whereas again the new class only had medium. And it has turreted medium lasers in the rear, which gives it a lot more defense and flexibility. Hyperdrive, yes. Shielding, yes. Very long and sleek, reasonably well appointed inside, but more in the fighting and maneuverability than the new class. I like this design. It actually reminds me of the assault shuttle from the old TIE Fighter and X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and X-Wing Alliance games. And very much harkens to other designs like the Theta and Lambda we'll get to in a bit. But I wish we knew more about it. Now we come to our first one designed during the time of the Empire, not just inherited from the Republic. And this is also our first from Cinar Fleet Systems, who had a virtual monopoly on smaller craft throughout the Empire's reign. This is the Delta class shuttle. And it's an interesting critter. This was Director Orson Krennic's shuttle from Rogue One. Why do so many people write it as Rouge One, although it is hilarious? And it kind of continues a design trend I pointed out in previous videos with vehicles, ships from Rogue One, of very long wings. It's not a complaint. It's just, you can tell, like, look at the U-Wing, look at the TIE Striker. I do like it. It's a unique style and different. That's one. It's funny that Rogue One had more unique ships than the sequel trilogy. And this is, of course, from the Black Series Titanium, because it didn't exist when the original Titanium came out, so I'll take it as it is. Interestingly, this was not designed for production. It was more of a thought experiment, a design concept, a prototype, a test bed at Cinar. But when Director Krennic saw it, he was always a tech guy, he kind of pushed him forward, so they decided to put it into production. And it was never heavily used because it's a very specialized craft, but it was built and used by certain people. It's pretty small, about 15 meters, although very tall, and it does have a hyperdrive, Class 1 with a Class 12 backup. So far, it seems pretty average. It has 2 medium lasers in the hull and 3 lighter lasers on the wingtips. Shielding, yes, but where it shines, is with its comms equipment. It has long-range communications gear, arrays, monitoring systems, and part of that it's housed in these very long wing structures, as are the shield generators, at least part of them. Another thing, you've noticed it's probably painted in black, is it has some elements of stealth and deflection and jamming built in. The wings do fold down, of course, and this becomes very long. See what I mean? Short stuff. I like it. It's a bizarre look. Short top wing, and then these giant ones. It said that the top one houses mostly shield generator, but these are the comms and jamming arrays, which, yeah, sure, why not? So stealth, communications, long range. It's kind of a special operations, covert, or command shuttle. It does have a crew of 5, at least in general. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, flight engineer, comms officer. And nominally it can carry up to 30 people on the back. But they have to be real friendly. It only has basic webbing, handholds, and crash seats to squeeze that many people in, yeah, you're going to be kind of sitting everywhere. But usually it was never loaded up near that. It usually just carried high-ranking dignitaries like the director himself and any kind of supporting people he might need. But it is well protected thanks to its defenses and has reasonably good offense if ever needed. It's reasonably fast and maneuverable. In fact, it's our fastest shuttle so far. It can reach 1,000 kph in atmosphere. In the Star Wars universe, that's almost, basically fighter speed. So it could outrun bombers and what have you. And it's just an interesting design. I'll give it full credit. The nose, the gun emplacements. I'll be honest, when I first unboxed this one, I thought, what the crap? It's probably our biggest if you just count the wingspan. At least they did it. And in my mind, it inspired a later shuttle we'll look at. Although canon says otherwise, but I think it's wrong. Interesting ship. Rogue One did give us some neat things. Let us move on to some more then. Keeping on with Rouge 1, we have the Zeta class Heavy Cargo Shuttle, or Heavy Transport. And this is our largest one so far, at 35.5 meters long. And it actually has 2 decks. There's the upper kind of flight deck, control deck, and then there's a lower cargo deck / container that can actually be dropped off detached. So kind of interesting. Only needs a crew of 2 to fly it, although a couple more, like a cargo handler, a flight engineer, or a gunner, can also join in. It's not meant for combat, but it does have weapons. It has 2 heavy cannons mounted more or less on the wings, and 3 medium cannons mounted on the hull in various places. So, can defend itself. Does have shielding, very reasonably well armored. It was designed by the Telgorn Corporation, but produced by Cinar Fleet Systems, not surprisingly. And it was based for short to medium range. It has a Class 3 hyperdrive with a Class 12 backup. When we see these in Rogue One, they're operating on Jeddah, transporting pallets of kyber crystals, going to Scarif, where they're delivering and helping on the construction of the nascent Death Star. And they're just a multi-purpose craft. They can carry people as well, but more for cargo. And they have a very utilitarian design. You see that kind of iconic shuttle in here, but very utilitarian. This one is from the Black Series Titanium. Hot Wheels also made one. I thought about which to buy, and I thought this one, the wing system especially, worked a little better. So I went with it. Spread out too, kind of like with the Delta. It's a good size. It's got a lot of heft. The body's all metal. The wing's plastic, of course. They fold well. They don't flop around. And this is a pretty iconic ship for that movie because the SW-0608 was the one stolen by Rogue One and used to infiltrate the base on Scarif. So it wasn't just a blink and you'll miss it background ship. And worth pointing out, and it's something you definitely would expect the Empire to need. Transports. With the Class 3 hyperdrive, you're not going to go too far, too fast, but short hops, planet to planet, you're fine. Class 3s are kind of the minimum, maybe a 4 at the very least to go places. Past that, yeah, you're not doing it. Most of your ships have at least a Class 2, though. For example, the Imperial Star Destroyer, so it's a little slower than that. In an atmosphere, it's not going to go anywhere fast, about 700 kph, so still faster than the Lot gunship at least. Don't know much more about it, but probably a whole lot more to know because, yeah, it's an Imperial cargo shuttle. But I do like the model. There are other cargo shuttles in universe, but this seems to be the Zeta and it's closely related to the Eta barge, transport barge. So there are variations kind of a similar flat design. What do you think? Well, from one of the newest shuttles, now it's time to talk about the original. The T4A Lambda class multi-purpose military shuttle. This is the original, first seen in Return of the Jedi, 1983. And in the real world, kind of the basis for all others. In universe, it's supposedly an upgrade of the new class, or the Omicron class, which, yeah, there's definitely evidence of it. And for me personally, this is the one I had the Kenner toy of as a kid. It was the biggest Star Wars toy I had, and I'm going to tell you, it was a lot of fun. But before we get into this, I did need to mention one we don't have. The T2C Theta class, designed by Cygnus during the Clone Wars, actually at direct request from the Chancellor, Palpatine. It was a military shuttle seen in Revenge of the Sith. And we don't have one in either Titanium or Hot Wheels or the Black Series. The only one I know that's even remotely this size is D'Agostini made one years ago, and unfortunately I haven't found one. So it looks similar to the Lambda, but a little more rounded, a little softer, a little smaller. It's about 18.5 meters long. It has a crew of 5, although it can be flown by 2. Carries up to 16 troops, or around 3 to 4 dignitaries. Class 1 hyperdrive, Class 15 backup, shielding. Has 2 quad lasers in the front for defense, and 1 light laser in the back that's retractable for defense, shielding, long range. It's a shuttle. It does shuttle things. And since the Clone Wars Army had plenty of other shuttle types, it wasn't used so much for troop transport, although sometimes it could be. But no, the Theta class was mostly used for diplomatic transport. Even after the Lambda started replacing it in the early days of the Empire, a lot of senators would continue to use the Theta. In fact, it got a little bit of a cult following as kind of a classic car of Star Wars. And as they started to get older and older, many of them were sold off and turned into freighters, cargo ships, and the rebellion ended up with some. And the last Thetas in the Empire were seen a little before the Battle of Hoth. After Hoth, the Empire pretty much had all of theirs phased out. But it was in universe the predecessor to the Lambda, and in the real world it was a nod, a gesture towards the Lambda. So let's get into the T4A now. Lots of diecast lines have done the Lambda over the years. Like I said, this is the one from Titanium. It's all metal, which is neat, including the wings. The only kind of downside to the wings, the way they're arranged on this one, that when they're down, they're fine. When they're up, they kind of just blop. And I know some have said they should just stay here, about that position. But they fold all the way in, which is pretty common. But when you fold them down, yeah, there we go. And the Emperor's version actually had a gray stripe on the nose to designate it. Internally, it had extra communications gear. It was customized, some stealth gear. His Theta class was as well. That's what he used, the Theta, that is, to rescue Lord Vader on Mustafar. So in almost every way, this is an upgrade. It's about 20 meters long. It had still a Class 1 primary hyperdrive, but it had a Class 10 backup, so much better backup. It had better shielding, redundant shielding. It was better armored. It, too, was only made for the military. Standard weapons were 2 forward-facing heavy blasters, or lasers, and 2 dual and rotatable cannons, so a total of 6 in the front, if you count the duals, and that had a retractable laser in the back. So 5 emplacements with a total of 7 barrels. It was a little faster. The old Theta was only 700 to 800 kph. This was about 850, 9, depending on the variant. So if something got in its sights, it could put some hurt on it. But it wasn't meant for combat. Standard crew was up to 6, although it can operate with 2, even 1 for short distances: pilot, co-pilot, engineer, navigator, gunner. Pretty normal stuff. In the back, it could carry up to 20 troops, which it did much more frequently than the Theta, because this was kind of the one and all that the Empire used. Or it could carry 8 officials in small little staterooms, kind of like you see on some airplanes. And I'm sure the Emperor's was even more kitted out. The Theta carried about 50 tons of cargo. The Lambda could carry 80, so not quite double, but close. And it was just a very popular craft, and considered one of the few truly elegant craft that the Empire had. So that was the the titanium. Here is another one I kind of ended up with years ago. I'm not sure which series it's from. I thought when I was getting it, it was going to be one of the titaniums, but when it came in, it's not. Almost does seem like an older one. I'm not sure what line it's from. You can let me know. This is how it came. It was in a plastic blister on a card. But the wings on the side seem a little shorter, and the nose is a little bit different. But the thing is, there's actually a few different models. The studio model for space shots looked a little different than the model used for actors, namely in the nose and the undercarriage. The space version had a more of an angular, swept down nose, whereas the one that actors, acted off of was more straight with more ground clearance. So it's actually okay if there's a few different variants. It does not have moving wings, which is unusual, but it is very heavy. It's entirely metal. Kind of neat. I just wish it had come with a stand. So thought I'd show it. Very classic design. A little bit cramped if fully loaded, but if more in the stateroom configuration, not so bad. Pretty good craft. Now, interestingly, it was designed by Cygnus, but it was produced by Cinar Fleet Systems. That's partially just because of the switch during the Empire, but it's said that many of the designers that had worked on it at Cygnus were lured away by Cinar, so it went into production there. Regardless, Cygnus would actually get a subcontract from Cinar to build them under license, so both places would build them ultimately. There's a lot I could say about it, but maybe we'll do an own dedicated video on the T4A Lambda. And if anyone knows where I can find a T2C Theta, I'd love to pick one up, but it just seems to be one that gets overlooked, which is funny because it's from Revenge of the Sith, which is a pretty popular film. But yeah, these were used throughout the Empire and were the primary shuttle for a long time. Even after Endor, they were still in production. They were also sometimes used as scout craft, or search and rescue craft, or even evacuation craft for stations. We see Luke taking one from the Death Star too. And typically, most installations would have a couple because they can go pretty far. And this is the multi-purpose variant, but we do have a new version. Well, I say new. It was introduced in '97 with a special edition that is based on this, but more specialized. For our next design, take these 3 ships and kind of mash them all together to get the Sentinel shuttlecraft, landing craft, transport. From the old gunship, we get the heavy armament and ability to carry vehicles. Kind of the general body style we get from the Zeta here. And, of course, the connection to the Lambda is pretty apparent. And much like the Lambda, this was designed by Cygnus and produced by both them, but primarily by CNR Fleet Systems because they were kind of the favorite. And this is our largest. It's 38 meters, making it a little bit bigger than the Zeta. And it was introduced sometime after the beginning of the Empire because they needed it. They used the acclimator to get a lot of troops and hardware onto a planet, but those are being retired out. The Venator often deployed gunships, but could be landed if really required, but it was being phased out. The Imperial Star Destroyer, the ISD, could not land, and as the gunships were aging out and their shortcomings, the gunship was great for certain purposes, but not for the needs of the Empire. So yeah, with the kind of basis of the Theta and even the original new class alongside the Lambda, this was created and was quite successful and would be the primary landing craft and multi-purpose transport for the Empire throughout the entire reign. In fact, production alongside the Lambda would continue after the Battle of Endor. And this model slash toy is from the Titanium series, and is one of the last ones they did. In our real world, this was first seen in '96 with Shadows of the Empire, and it was made really canon when it appeared in the special edition of A New Hope in '97. These were sent down to Tatooine to deliver sand troopers, or even if they were already on planet, to move them around. Interestingly, it said that they also transported dewbacks. Yeah, okay, I'm just trying to imagine animals inside. It was also used to transport snowtroopers to Hoth. Actually, I should say it was also used to invade the rebel base at Yavin after they'd left after the destruction of the Death Star, too. And it was used, to be specific, 7 of them were used to invade Bespin, inserting the Imperial garrison there after the deal didn't go so well for Orlando. And so very much still in use by the time of Endor and afterwards. Good military service on that one. So let's take her off the stand. And the specs on this are pretty good. I remember having one of these in the old Action Fleet series. Wings fold down. Very Imperial-like. This wing's a little loose on mine when down. This one's a little bit stiffer, but when they're up, they're fine. So, it could be flown by 2 people, but a standard crew was 5. Basically, you had pilot, co-pilot, sensor operator, and then 3 gunners. And this had a lot of guns. It had 8 laser cannons in various places. It had 2 missile launchers, each with 8 missiles. So first time we're really seeing that since the gunship. It had 1 ion cannon that was retractable up top here. And it had 2 anti-personnel blasters, 1 front, 1 back. And each of these weapons kind of had a purpose. The 8 standard lasers were for kind of close air support, as we call it today, supporting ground troops or defending itself in space. The ion cannon was there because this was sometimes used as a boarding craft, delivering Marines to a spaceship or space station. And the blaster cannons are pretty obvious to kind of cover the ground as it's deploying its troops, defending them. Not only did it have shielding, it actually had a total of 4 shield generators, 2 front, 2 rear, so redundant. It had 25% heavier armor than the Lambda class. And it could carry 180 tons of cargo compared to the Lambda's 80. And that could be a mix of many things. The inside here is very configurable. Standard setup was 54 troops, which consisted of 6 squads of 9 each, plus they had 12 E-Web heavy blaster assemblies in there, and 4 speeder bikes. Alternatively, if it was just dedicated to troopers, it could carry up to 75. Or if it was dedicated to just hardware, it could carry up to 36 74Z speeders or one AT-ST Scout Walker. Probably disassembled or on its side at the very least. But pretty versatile. In the cockpit, in this area, we have pretty good sensors and communications arrays. It has very long-range comms, so it can communicate with Imperial installations. Has an autopilot. It even has computer targeting for the lasers if gunners aren't available. And it has terrain following sensors in the nose. It has infrared, life sign detectors, again, kind of for the close support. And you'd think with all this stuff, it'd be pretty slow and unmaneuverable. Well, it would be, except it has very advanced, very powerful Cygnus engines in the back. It can achieve 1,000 kph, so as fast as the Delta class shuttle. And for its size, is actually quite maneuverable and tough and very capable. Primarily, these were used to take troops from a Star Destroyer to a planet's surface, yes, but almost every Imperial installation, Imperial garrison had one or two around because they were just too darn useful. Maybe to get troops around a planet, or to use as a scout, or a rescue, or an escape craft, because you could transport a lot of people. They just found it to be very useful, so they ended up selling a lot of these, and this was just standard throughout the Empire for a long time. What do you think? I enjoy the design. It's much sleeker than our cargo shuttle over here, the Zeta. Very much Lambda-esque. But it also has a very utilitarian, and officially it is in A New Hope now, so take it for what you will. This is from the Titanium series. I don't believe the Black Series Titanium or Hot Wheels have done this one. It's a shame. And this was actually very late in the series, and so it's not a very common model today. Unfortunately, like a lot of the late series ones, it's lighter weight, more plastic, less metal. As you would expect, the wings are plastic, but it's a pretty, for its size, it shocked me how light it is. I'm not going to say it's bad. It's got a lot of detailing, but it's not near as heavy as the Lambda. But again, with the 2008, 2009 releases, I kind of expect that. I'm just glad they did it. I just wish it was a more common craft. Yeah, the Imperial Sentinel landing craft. And of course the Rebels used it some as well. It's basically just a very well equipped flying box with good electronics, good comms gear, and which is good. Seems like the Empire, while it might have gotten a little behind on its ties, was pretty crackerjack when it came to its shuttles and boarding craft and landing craft. That actually brings us to one that's missing, I'll talk about briefly. Breaking the mold of Imperial shuttles being pretty good, we have the TIE SH, the TIE VIP shuttle, the TIE command shuttle. We don't actually have a model of it, but we see it in Empire Strikes Back. Basically, they took a TIE bomber and flipped the wings. Now, in A New Hope, they had considered making what they called the TIE boarding craft, the TIE BR, which was the origin of these wings and the pods, but they would ultimately turn that into Darth Vader's TIE Advanced. So the concept was there, and when they just needed a shuttle for Captain Nita to take to his demise in Empire Strikes Back, they kind of quickly kit-bashed a TIE bomber, and, it works. And that's what I'm kind of planning to do here. This isn't the one you've seen in previous videos. This is a used one I had come in with some other things 2 or 3 years ago, and the wings are loose on it. That's how they came to me, because these are riveted on. I think what I'm going to do is pop the rivets, see if I can flip them over and do a little kit bashing. I mean, I've got nothing to lose. This thing cost me $2, so I might try to turn this into a TIE shuttle, because I doubt anyone's going to do it. But it was from an iconic scene in Empire Strikes Back, so why not? Now, in universe, this is a relatively okay craft. It was designed for transport between Star Destroyers or Star Destroyers, basically space to space, basically. And you have 2 pods on the right. You still have the pilot and a lot of the support systems. On the left, on the port side, you have a crew pod. If it's transporting troopers, they can cram up to 12 of them in there. Or if it's transporting actual officers, people they care about, it seats 4. It even has some amenities for the officers. Padded seats, little refrigerator with a couple of drinks and snacks, even a small toilet. Basically think of an airplane, which I hope Nita enjoyed on his way to Vader. It also had shielding. In fact, it had dual generators, one under each pod, and it had additional armor, including on the wings, the panels, because this is still transporting officers. And it had 1 to 2 lasers, typically mounted right in the center instead of on the pod. If this seems like it was kind of slapped together, it was. When they were building the Death Star, there was a request from the Navy for something that officers could use quickly to get from point A to point B. Well, Sentinel was already making the Lambda shuttle and other things, so they weren't really interested, but they had a tender, so they took the TIE boarding craft, the TIE bomber design, and quickly swapped it around, and it was affordable, it was cheap, no hyperdrive still. It does have life support at least, so it was good for transporting in between a planet and a ship and ship, or at most between the system, one side of a solar system to another, but without any kind of light speed. Yeah, and if this was going any distance, it would be escorted. It was reasonably fast for what it was, about 850 kph in an atmosphere, so kind of in the middle of shuttles. But yeah, I'll get to work on maybe kit bashing this, probably trim off the targeting thing. I don't know, play with it. If I screw it up, which I probably will, nothing lost. But I just wanted to mention the TIE shuttle, since it's literally a shuttle. And with that, well, we're going to go to everyone's favorite, the sequel trilogy. The First Order AAL, Atmospheric Assault Lander. This is the model 1971. And basically, this is like a World War II landing barge. And it has elements of the gunship. Like the original Republic gunship, it's really only designed for short-range missions, basically from a ship to a planet, or maybe a ship to a station. That's all it does. Unlike the gunship, it doesn't really have guns. It's a barge. But it relies on speed. It's actually capable of reaching about 900 kph in atmosphere. Very sleek. And really where its speed comes into play is when it lands. It's able to disembark its troopers within 30 seconds and then take off again. Whereas the gunship would hang around to provide support, this would not. It would dump them off and then return. And unlike the gunship, it could actually return to orbit. So it did have that going on. But no hyperdrive, at least as a standard feature. Although it did have redundant shield generators and a good main reactor and 4 sublight engines. It was a little under 18 meters long, so a little bit shorter than the gunship. Only had a crew of 2. A pilot, who was actually in the rear in essentially standing room or half seating room only, and then a gunner that would pop out of a hatch here. You can see the little round circle hatch where he could pop out of. And he had an anti-personnel repeating blaster, basically a machine gun, that would only be used on the ground. When it was landed on its 4 little legs, the pilot would end up being a spotter, kind of looking around, making sure the troops could disembark. It also had lights and had terrain following sensors for landing and sensing of enemies. But yeah, simple, light crew. It was actually piloted by TIE pilots, who I'm not sure they really enjoyed having it. It did have shielding at least. And we had a ramp in the front for the troops to disembark. Both Hot Wheels and Black Series made this one, but I went with the Black Series because it does actually have an articulating ramp, and that's kind of a big deal for this type. Even has a little detailing. In the compartment, essentially standing room only, or at least kind of crash seats, it carried 20 troopers, 2 squadrons with their gear, and it could carry 2 125Z tread speeders, essentially the replacement for the 74Z. And that's it. Yeah, it's zoomed down. These are manufactured and designed, by the way, by Sinar James Systems, Army Systems, which was a conglomerate that formed after the fall of the original empire. It's a simple, pretty durable craft, nothing fancy, but something that could be mass-produced and quickly zoom down, dump off troops, and if needed, take them back. We see prisoners being put on these too, so they can serve other. But it was either a troop transport or prisoner transport. You're not going to catch officers and VIPs in these. The First Order was even more elitist than the Empire about that. No, they got their own. For ranking officers and important people, Sinar James made this, the Upsilon class command shuttle VIP transport. Now, in universe it said this is an evolution of the Lambda, but to me it looks more like the Delta here. Also in the role it fulfills. What do you think? This is also known as Kylo Ren's shuttle. And I have 2 examples here. One from Black Series Titanium and one from Hot Wheels. In universe, this is about 19 meters. And it's not really designed for combat. It has 2 heavy laser cannons in the front. But no, it's designed more as a mobile command post and reconnaissance craft and whatnot. So it mostly relies on its defenses, again, kind of like the Delta. It has very good, very long-range, very powerful communications and monitoring systems. It also has elements of stealth. It has sensor jammers, and it has jammers to countermeasure weapons being fired at it. It has redundant shield generators, and it has a reasonably well-appointed cabin for command purposes. Standard crew of 5, kind of the usual by now: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, comms officer, and engineer. And doesn't carry a whole lot of extra people, typically 10 to 12 at most, because it's given away to other equipment. But yeah, we see this used in the sequel trilogy, and this is their actual shuttle. And yes, it does have a hyperdrive class 1 with a class 10 backup. Let's look at this one first. So right off the bat, we notice a pretty blunt nose. We've got the 2 cannon here, and we've got 2 pretty good sized engines back here. In atmosphere, this is capable of about 950 kph, so almost as fast as the fastest one today. Now, on this model, the wings don't fold. They land though, which is kind of neat, I guess. But what they do is they extend up. Come on. There we go. In universe, it's said this is happening because your sensors and comms equipment and all the jamming stuff is in these, so that spreads out their profile. And the lower wing is supposed to house the shield generator and armor. It's also said that when lower on the ground, the wings being up give it extra protection. Then, of course, these collapse in again, maybe. Yeah, you can tell I haven't moved these much. I'll be honest, I think it's a little silly, but I get what they were going for. I think in principle, it works. But when you push these in, don't squeeze too much. Try to grab on the edge and they typically will go in. Luckily they are, there we go. They are soft, flexible. So in universe they come in so it can land smaller areas. They just stand on its own well though. The Hot Wheels, on the other hand, at least this version, does have moving wings. And it's said that they spread out like that in flight to better utilize the jamming systems and comm systems, kind of like a rabbit ear antenna. But the tips do not extend out on this. They're just fixed in. As you see, there is a step in them. So it's kind of up to you which one you prefer. This one doesn't really have the landing gear on it either. It does have the heavy cannons, of course. And they do this both in black and more of a gray-white. I wonder which one's taller. Yeah. Seems like the Black Series here is built to a larger scale, so that's kind of neat. Pros and cons. Like a lot of the sequel stuff, very easy to get, very inexpensive, so you can get a couple of them if you want. I think it does look kind of neat, spread out like this. Something about it. Either way, this is the VIP shuttle that the First Order uses. Seen throughout the sequels, and this is the latest version in the shuttle series that began, if I can find the peg port, with the new class and all that. So I thought it was worth including today. What do you think? Let's wrap this up.